Hey everybody, it's John, and I'm here with Terry Johnson from Firearms Legal Protection, and we're here at Wilderness Tactical in Phoenix. You guys know I use their stuff all the time. They let us use some space. Grateful for that. Got a good discussion today, and we've been talking about this a little bit. You know, I'm a training junkie. I like to take classes as a student, and of course I teach classes too. But I've had some people this idea that says, wait a minute, if I train a bunch, won't that be held against me in a court of law? And so I've asked the attorney to come and talk with us about it. Today's video is brought to us by the generosity of Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners. You win the fight, and they will help you win the fight after the fight for the rest of your life. There's a link in the description for a coupon code for a discount for all active self-protection watchers. So, Terry, what do you think of this argument? You know, I've heard these folks say that, well, wait a minute, you've trained so much, and an overzealous prosecutor will say, aha, you wanted to kill someone because you trained a lot. What do you think?
I've heard that argument before, and again, it comes down to what's the purpose of your training. The purpose of your training is to protect yourself, knowing when to and when not to use lethal force, how to avoid it, things along those lines. If you can demonstrate that, that's great. But if you're just taking classes to take classes, to say, hey, you know, I've got this, I've done this, and boy, I'm going to go out and shoot up everything, and no one's ever going to mess with me, and things along those lines, you know. But I think the more training you have, the better off actually you really are. Even in a court of law, because now, if you take the stand, which is probably a whole nother...
That's a big question in and of itself.
A whole nother tape at some point. But if you take the stand and you have to talk about your credentials and things along those lines, you're more likely to, from an expert position, to know what's going on, as long as you don't lose that training. In other words, we did a video a while back about the corporal in Brazil, and that one. You know, that would be one where you would say, God, that was not reasonable. You know, but if you could justify based upon your training and other things why you've done certain things, I believe a jury will look at you in a more positive light as opposed to some guy who just picked up a firearm, who's never gone back to the range, he just got his, you know, CCW, never did another thing. Those are, I think, the people that scare the juries and the citizens more than anyone else.
So I think you said something interesting there, that you said, wait a minute, when I'm talking about my credentials, I'm going back to, I did this, and this is my training, and so I have to be able to document that I knew that ahead of time. So you might say, well, I watched a YouTube video once, and I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but we're here talking on YouTube, right?
Right.
Now you might say, wait a minute, I can validate that I've actually seen that or whatever, but if I can document that I had this training, and that's why I acted the way that I did, and that training came from a competent authority, that seems that it would help me.
That is correct. I mean, you know, I've got 2 credentials for instruction. I also have a legal background, obviously, so if I'm ever in a situation, will I be held to a higher standard? Probably in the minds of the jurors.
Sure.
However, I can then point and say, you know, legally, this, and this, or based upon training that I've taken from John or taken from other places, I can look at that, you know, and I can refer to that, and people will say, okay, this person has a basis for what they're doing, as opposed to,
you know, felt good.
Yeah, felt good, or yeah, I took a 6-hour class to, you know, get a CCW 4 years ago, and, you know, shot my gun twice since. That doesn't go over too well.
Right. Well, and especially, wait a minute. So if I showcase, I have a high level of skill. That's why I train, because God forbid I get in that moment. I want to know that I can use this firearm to defend myself, and I'm going to not make mistakes with it.
Correct.
That's a big deal to me. Now, I want to ask, too, about the trainers that you train with, because there are some in the industry where you might see a class that's titled The Gentleman Killer.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you bring that up. Most people, most respectable gun owners and trainers like yourself, aren't going to use the word killer or things or acronyms along those lines. And the reason is, we don't shoot to kill. We shoot to stop the threat. And that is something that we have to get out again and again. Why are you doing this? because I was in imminent fear of death or great bodily harm, and I had to stop this threat. If you get a class or go to a class and they start telling you, give them one in the head, shoot them in the back, etc., things along those lines, that's not the type of class you need to be in. And quite honestly, if you're in the middle of one of those things, it's best that you leave.
So the reputation and the trustworthiness of the person who gives me training is important, because if they, a prosecutor may very well say, wait a minute, well, you were trained by this person who has this inflammatory internet personality who has trained you to do these bad things.
Correct.
And that could give me problems.
It could, and here's the thing: if you go to a place that's known as a CCW factory, where you go in and I'm not going to name names, but let's say I've heard of places in Florida. Literally, it's they give you a gun, you shoot into a bucket, you disarm the firearm, give it to this guy, walk from here to the door, and guess what happens? They give you a certificate.
Right.
That's scary.
That's very scary.
Those are the ones, I believe, that type of training is going to hurt you if you ever have to use lethal force. Because you meet the bare minimum to get a concealed permit doesn't mean that you've trained properly. So the more training you have, the better knowledge, the better research. You deal with Mossad. He is a known quantity. So you can say, I've gone to his classes, this is his teaching, etc. Those are things that really make a difference versus, I went to some guy, he was at the gas station, and, as I was filling up my car, I get my CCW.
And here's a thought on that. So training is great, but I'd love your thoughts on this, Terry, because if I got to think about the person that I train with is going to perhaps end up on the witness stand talking about, this is what I trained them to do, and this is how that person performed in the things that I trained him or her in. And do I want that trainer on the stand for me?
Yep.
Are they, there's some, again, they have a cult following, but are they going to be good in front of a jury? This is why you brought up Mossad Ayoob. Okay, one of the reasons that I'm super proud of my graduation from Mag 40 is, do I want Mossad Ayoob on the witness stand for me? You're darn right I do. And he's going to be able to say, here's exactly how John performed, here's the things that John was taught, we can show those things in court because he's the expert, and that will help me, not hurt me.
Absolutely, and so, if I were a prosecutor, some of the questions I would ask, would be, so you put these classes together, have you ever failed anyone? Because if you just pass everyone that comes through, or better yet, what are the qualities that you look for in an individual before they can take the class? Do they have to have any prerequisites? Do you already have to have a CCW?
Yeah.
Have you had to been carrying for 3 years? Those are things that actually help to show that you're a more responsible, knowledgeable person in carrying a firearm. And if you have to use lethal force, based upon your training and everything else, because guess what? Take a police officer, for example. Again, I'm not saying every police officer is perfect, but we all know they go through training. And what do we always go back to when they're involved in a shooting? What's the policy and what's their level of training?
What can they document? What can I submit as evidence?
Exactly. So, if you, as an officer, only shoot twice a year, guess what? That might be good enough. If you, as a CCW holder, only shoot once every 4 years...
Especially if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Now that can be seen as negligence.
Yes.
So I like trainers that have objective standards. I like trainers that maintain that. It's one of the reasons that when we do our Cover Your Ass tour stops, that we give objective data to people. Here's how you performed when you got here. Here's how you performed at the end. Here's the curriculum that you were taught. And so then that way we have documentation for them that says, if God forbid you're ever in a thing, this is what we've done. And here's how I have told you to keep training and practicing so that you can keep these skills high. And the trainers that do that, I'm not toting my own horn here, I learned that from the great trainers that I've trained under, are the ones that will help you stay safe legally.
Oh, absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's their reputation that's being put on. And think about it. If you've done something wrong and you've just kind of lost it at that moment, there's no way that one of your trainers, you're not going to call that trainer to come up and say, yep, everything John did is right. But if you've done the things you're supposed to do,
right,
you can now go back and get your trainer and say, is this what you would have taught? Yep, I taught this, in my opinion, because now they could be classified as an expert,
right,
or qualified as an expert, I should say, to give an opinion, and that goes a long way.
It does. So the more of those you have, of high quality people, the better chance you have of being seen as reasonable, as doing the right thing in the moment. And so it seems to me that the more training from reputable sources you have, then you can stack that up like cord wood, and you make a prosecutor's job an awful lot harder to prove that you were not acting reasonably.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that you really got to keep in mind as you go through all of this is training's a good thing. You know, I mean, it's no different than riding a bike. If you haven't rode a bike in years, you may remember how to do it exactly, but guess what? When you first get on, you're going to be kind of back and forth trying to get your balance. Training is good. It's repetitive. It's the muscle memory. You get it inside you. The more you do, the more you know, the more you can learn, and the better off you will be.
And guys, Terry hasn't asked me to do this, but I'm going to say this now, is that this is why I think having a company like Firearms Legal Protection behind you is so important. Because not only do they bring us this kind of education, I mean, Terry is here letting us pick his brain, and attorneys charge $300, $400, $500 an hour for this kind of knowledge, and he lets us pick his brain. But to have somebody, the legal team standing behind you, that can say, hey, wait a minute, we need to get with all of your trainers and build this case and talk to the prosecutor beforehand. So we're not ended up in court. We want that prosecutor to know this is going to be a fight you don't want to fight. And having a company like Firearms Legal Protection behind me, where I'm not mortgaging the house to do that, but I have this team behind me, I think it's super valuable, guys. They provide a great discount for active self-protection fans. I'm a member. For me, for my wife, for the rest of our team, we trust FLP. And so think about something like that in this year, and I think that'll help you guys. So Terry,
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion. Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, and stay safe.